So
Have you guys ever done a sauna?
sauna, not yet. I've heard good things.
I think I have. Yeah, I think I've done it like once.
I,
It was a long time ago.
dude I know just built one in his backyard, and I went and did it, and then did it like the Finnish way, where you like jump in the snow afterwards and then go back in and then come back out into the snow.
Wait, are you gonna start being one of those like old men who like
Oh yeah,
who like just goes straight naked in a freezing pool of water, and then like I'm forgetting what that crew is called, but is this a new hobby of yours now, Corey?
They did that. They did that when I was in Boy Scouts, where it was like the Penguin Club or some weird thing where you have to get up early and go and jump in the pool.
Polar bear, whatever.
Yeah,
Polar bear. It sounds frightening, man.
This is way different than that, but yeah, I am full on that old man. I'm heading that direction for sure.
So tell me, was it worth it? Like, was it like, did it have like? Because I've heard something about like some sort of chemistry behind that, like shock something.
Yeah. So you know how I've had problems with my arms and back for like over a year now. That is the best that my arms and back have felt in months.
Huh.
And it was crazy. So yeah, I was gonna show this during the show, but I'll show you this now. Let's see if I can get it to pull up. So I'm planning. There we go. That's what I was looking for. That button. So this is the view from my backyard of this deck that came with our house. And
the was a little off, but let's get
is way off. This is like a 10-minute sketch. But I'm gonna put a cinder block sauna right there.
Wow.
So I actually think that this might be the thing that I'm looking for to like solve my wrists and arms and back.
Huh.
It was crazy. I can't explain it, and it sounds insane when you talk about like what you're actually doing. But yeah, I got in the sauna. We were wearing board shorts. Got in the sauna, was in there. It was 210 degrees. We're tossing water on the rocks. It's like steamy. You can't breathe. You do that for a few minutes, and then you go jump in the snow. And then you go back and do that 2 or 3 times. And like days of no pain after that.
Huh. So quick question. So like if you build your own sauna, what do you need for that? Like how do you go about building your own sauna? Because that's insane.
You should do like 100 days of building a sauna.
That's true.
Oh, I hope it doesn't take me 100 days. I've got a really good buddy of mine who said he'd trade labor for art. And so anyway, he does concrete.
Nice.
And stuff. And so I think I just have to do just supplies and whatnot. So I've been looking at it, and I'm looking at I don't know, but I've looked into it. There's a lot of different things. Like you can do basically like a big wine barrel, but like 6 feet tall. That's one style that I think would probably work in a different climate a little bit better. But I'm basically just going to build a vapor locked cinder block cube, and then put a door in it and some ventilation and a sauna.
So then how do you heat it?
So you can buy. Yeah, up here people sell like used wooden, like old cast iron stoves that people like. You just shove wood in it and it heats up. You can also, I'm looking at like an electric sauna heater. There's some of those. Basically, it's just you heat up rocks, and there's a number of ways to heat up rocks. And so, like, my buddy, he just has a basket of rocks sitting on top of an old cast iron stove that he got off of Facebook Marketplace. So you just stoke the fire and then throw water on the rocks. So
Wow.
I don't know, but there's a whole community online of people that do this and talk about it. And they make all kinds of crazy claims. And there's other people that are like disproving some of those claims. But I mean, there's all these people saying, oh yeah, it's like a detox situation because you're sweating and whatever else. And I read another article. It's like, you're not actually sweating out toxins, but
yeah,
there are definitely, upsides to like the muscle relaxation and anti-inflammatory benefits and things like that. So I think Scott could just walk outside and just, stand in one place in the sun for a few minutes.
That's true.
I don't know if it's quite 200 degrees, but
so
sure
in Arizona, you just need to like have a walk-in freezer and you have the same effect. Like you just walk outside and then like stand outside for about 15 minutes, 30 minutes, then just jump in the walk-in freezer and then jump back outside.
Yeah, or just go into a shed, like a tin shed that doesn't have a heater in it, but is just in full sunlight. It's probably the same effect.
Yeah.
I don't know how you get the other thing. The other thing I was looking at doing, and this is probably more work than I'm interested in, but my yard is on a slope. And so I was looking at like burying it. So it's like semi-exposed in the hillside.
Burying your whole house or the sauna?
No, the sauna.
Okay.
House,
No, look at the size of the door. That's fairly proportional. So yeah, it's it's about 6 or 7 feet tall. Anyway, but yeah, I just cut it into the hillside that I live on, and then I don't know. But then I'd have to like rent a tractor, and that doesn't sound as fun as that sounds. It sounds like too much work. So
yeah, that sounds insane. But at the same time, that's cool. And if it's gonna help your your pain and like help you be able to be productive and stuff, that's good, man.
You should make it look like a Hobbit house.
Oh
yeah,
man,
dude.
Yeah, there are okay, hold on.
There's this whole thing I went down a rabbit hole looking at years ago where it was like these little modified like Lego pieces. They're like these giant, like almost like igloo shaped Lego pieces that you can build your own little Hobbit environment. And I was so tempted, and then I had to remember that I in art school like had trouble just building a wood frame for just a canvas, which is like, if you can't do that, if you can't build like a canvas frame for like a wood panel to paint on, and you have trouble being like straight and measured with that, like you're probably going to have trouble doing anything like to the level of what you guys are talking about.
Yeah. So I did actually look at the whole Hobbit thing, and
see, this is why we're friends, Corey.
So I looked at something like this, which has like a planter on top, right?
Oh, I love it.
And then I also looked at like, similar structure. This is there's something called earth bags, and you basically just make these domes out of earth bags, and then they're so stable. It's just bags full of dirt and rock and whatever, but they're so stable that you can basically bury them like the hobbits do, and you just build a shire in the backyard.
Dude, backyard shire would be amazing.
So here's like the earth bag design. I spent way too long. But there's like you can put like stairs in it and stuff. So yeah, and then you can either like plaster it like this, where you have just these weird like Tatooine looking houses, or you can pile it with dirt and have moss and rocks and whatever else grow over the top of it. This will not be happening. I'm not going to be doing this. But I did go down this hole.
The Hobbit hole.
The Hobbit hole. I went down a Hobbit hole. But I mean, a design like this actually isn't that complicated to build. Because it's basically just tongue and groove. You do a male router on one side and a female router on the other side.
You lost me at tongue and groove. I just
you know, you understand male and female parts, right?
Sort of.
Well, let me explain it to you in terms of building things. When you talk about a male part, that's a part that protrudes out, that is expected to go into something.
Yes.
When you talk about a female part, that's a part that receives a male part. So you put a male side where it's got a little nub that sticks out on one side of the board, and on the other side of the board you have a female side where it's like indented in the shape of that nub, and then you just wrap them around and take two like steel bands and just tighten them, and it seals it up.
Yeah, still not understanding. It might just be, I don't know. I always the few times I've tried to do like around the house kind of stuff that's not just like basic stuff, like I usually end up in a hole where I have to spend more money fixing the errors that I made than just like hiring somebody to begin with to do it right. But I should have taken wood shop or something in high school.
Yeah, let me see if I can find this one. Let's see if we can get a copyright strike here. Is this guy going to do it for us? Yep, there we go. Okay, so he's got this is called a router, right? It's a little spinning bit. And he's just putting male and female grooves into either side of these. Let me see.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Like little steps. Okay.
Right. So back here, let's see if I can pause it. You can see like one side, this is the male side, and this is the female side. And then after he does that to all the wood, then he cuts this circle, and you just go in and put all the male and female together, bind them up with the steel thing, and then you're good.
In theory, that sounds so simple.
This is a heater. And it's just got rocks on top that you just toss water on.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, there's my rabbit hole. That probably should have gone in challenges, since I spent way more time looking at that than I should have. But
fun to hear.
Yeah, but anyway, you can do stuff like this in the snow. So, yeah.
Especially where the area you live, I could see that being appealing. Like, whereas here, I think, I don't know, I would just, I'm kind of a little bit cooler of an area than Scott, but not much because I'm in a desert too. So it's like, it just does, like a sauna does not sound relaxing. Although, like a spa or something sounds relaxing until it comes to the reality of having to clean the thing and stuff.
Yeah, that's why I like the saunas. It's just a box. This is my cat who followed me out into my backyard while I was measuring things and decided that she wanted to try to walk on the snow, and she keeps falling in. So anyway.
That's so surreal to see all that snow, man.
Yeah, that's my backyard. So anyway, I don't think her breed is a snow breed. Black color that she is.
She does look like she's hunting something though, for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, there's a divergent. We got Victor in the chats.
Hey, Victor.
So yeah, who wants to go first? I'll stop talking about saunas.
I guess I can go. I've been working on a new digital product. I also uploaded a video, so and everything that goes with that, filming it, editing it, all that stuff. So that's up there, and and I've been working on Young and Dead. I've been working on the comics. So
Yes.
yeah, and if anyone wants, there are T-shirts now available, Young and the Dead T-shirts. So I think those are here. Where is that thing? There. Yeah. Amazon.com/shop/Circworks is where you can find the T-shirts. So, and they're priced to sell. They're like, basically, I'm not making any money off of them. I'm just trying to get out of the next tier. So good chance to get those.
I love it. It's a loss leader. You guys got to take advantage of that while it's still there. I ordered one today, so I will let you know when it comes up. But I'm pretty pumped because it's a good comic, and I want to reiterate to anybody watching us or anything like that, like indie comics, even if they're carried by like the largest publishers in the world, have like usually relatively small sales numbers. So like the one thing that kind of keeps indie comics alive is doing things like buying a T-shirt of the comic and stuff like that. So support Scott, support Young and the Dead, so we can see the conclusion of it, So yeah, anyhow.
I'm working on it.
Love it. Cool.
Josh, what have you got done?
Okay, let me see here. I'll try to share this if I can. I had it pulled up. Is it not? There it is. There we go. Okay, so I have been doing thumbnails for the next book. And I've gotten through this whole sequence where there's like this crazy neighbor finally escaped the house, and now there's these kind of dumb cops. And it was actually a pretty fun sequence, like this one in particular, where it's mostly just eye movement. That's like the change. What'll be a nightmare when drawing this is because I'm like a fan of Chris Ware and stuff, I'm not going to cut and paste when it comes to the final. So I'm going to be redrawing pretty much the exact same pose just to have an eye movement.
So you're going to be re-inking it or redrawing it and then inking it?
I mean, these are all going to be drawn and inked. These are just thumbnails, so yeah.
Right, but my question is, you're not going to copy and paste the pencils?
Nope.
Okay.
Because I'm weird like that. With this style, it just kind of works better the other way. I am kind of looking forward to what you were describing, though, where there's going to be this beautiful point in this book when I'm making it, when I'm done with thumbnails and I'm done with pencils. Might be a year from now, might be a couple of years from now, but where it's just all inking, and that sounds like the funnest year ever. And actually will be easier for like podcasting or talking, on camera and stuff too, because it's like it is a lot easier to kind of talk to people while you're inking. At least for me, I don't know if you guys have that. It's a little harder when you're like penciling or thumbnailing. But yeah.
Victor says he's getting a shirt once he gets some cash.
Yeah, it'll be there.
What about you, Corey? What all did you get?
I got a bunch of animation stuff. So I've got this scene rigged where I move this up and down, and he moves his arm up and down. I move it left and right, and he extends his arm. And so if I move it diagonally, you can extend it or retract it or push it out like this. So that was fun. And then each of these girls is also controlled that way. So I can move them back and forth. I can move their eyes and all that jazz, hands and whatnot. So we're getting closer in that. Did episode 8 of Breaking the Chains with Jim. This is Jim's artwork. I also did this guy, kind of based on what Jim drew, not based on using what Jim drew. So we're getting to the figuring out like the lip sync stuff and stuff like that. And then I spent way too long going down a rabbit hole of saunas and so, which is a huge distraction, but is also semi-related because I feel like it's something sustainable that I can do to continue to do this stuff, because everything else I feel like is either making things worse or just kind of maintaining but not like improving anything. So anyway, so it's semi-art related, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I've written a bunch of dialogue. I talked about that on Friday's show with Kathy, but I've written a bunch of dialogue for the next arc of From Hell's Heart, which is that, and it's Ishmael talking to Ahab, and Ahab is...
Wait a second. I'm not going to let this just pass casually. So wait, you're going to delve into some comic making?
Yeah, so it's too bright to see it, but
dude,
anyway, there you go.
Yes.
So there's some script.
I'm very excited about that, Gary.
A little bit of writing, yeah.
I love animation and I love every form of art, but if I can get someone else to partake in the weird drug habit of comics, I become like a shameless drug pusher about comics. So I'm excited to hear that, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, as I was, and I won't get into it because I spent, I don't know, way too long talking about it last time, but I think, Scott, you watched that episode, right?
The one with Kathy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I was talking, anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, the gist of the show is I figured out the thing that makes this world work. So there was like a missing component, which for me was like the motivation of the main antagonist, like the motivation of the villain. Like, I don't like having flat villains that don't have drive or are just evil for the sake of being evil. And so I figured that out, and it's got kind of like a supernatural tilt to it. And his end result, I think, is close to being what I need it to be, but there's some tweaks. So I've been studying revenge and what causes psychologically, what causes people to want to take revenge. And there's a really interesting study showing that collectivist societies are more likely to react as a whole in a revenge state than other types. And so that means that the villain can target specific collectivist countries for his causes. And so that gives me kind of like the storytelling thing. So I've just got to figure out more about different types of governments and how that affects the psychology of the people and causes people to seek revenge in mass.
Dude, I love it. Are you still planning the kind of like it will be a greater arc, but it'll be kind of like the Sandman or
I never want to say that something that I'm doing is going to be like the Sandman, but
well, no, what I mean is like the way it's laid out. Is it going to be sort of taking place in this universe with broad arcs, but you can diverge and kind of have different. Yeah, so I think that's, and I think so Magnola, which I'm blanking out on the Magnola book, which is
Hellboy.
Great.
Yeah,
but similar like structure to that.
Yeah, I mean a little bit more story driven than like Hellboy's short stories, which are basically just like tiny little unrelated missions. But yeah, there's still going to be like a big world where there's two main forces one is trying to get everybody in the world to seek revenge on everybody in the world, right? And the other one is trying to thwart those efforts, and it'll eventually culminate into something which will probably be years down the road. But the basic idea is that whenever I feel like telling a story, I'll put out 6 to 12 pages of a short story, and it'll all fit in continuity and everything. But it won't be like I won't spend five years working on one graphic novel because I just don't have that level of fortitude and commitment. So I'm a little bit more distracted than that. So I've got to kind of switch projects more frequently. So this gives me the opportunity to kind of do that. And I mean, writing it right now, I still haven't figured out enough to get to even like thumbnailing at this point. But
yeah, but that's the start, and that's cool. And I do think that's the way to do it, because I think weirdly it's like, none of us have 5 years to spend on a graphic novel, so it's like you have to kind of chip away at it in whatever way you want if you want to kind of eventually make them and stuff. And I think that sounds like a feasible way to actually end up spending possibly 5 years creating a graphic novel and kind of tricking yourself to where you feel like it's not 5 years, So I think that's feasible and doable. Plus, I honestly am excited to see you play with ink more, because it's like some of the stuff you were doing with that short story was just so cool to see, all the different ink textures and stuff like that.
I love ink. I've missed it, so it'll be fun. It'll be fun to get back to it. It's been a while. I mean, I still ink in my sketchbook and stuff, but Victor says he saw Ty Templeton doing a very detailed thumbnail of Batman, and so you're not the only one that does super tight thumbnails.
I'm trying a new thing, because my thumbnails prior to this have been like, they look like a chicken, chicken scratch would be like an upgrade from what my usual thumbnails are. I usually would show them, like, I remember when I first started, I didn't realize, like, when you show a client roughs, you show them like polished roughs, so I'd like show these like doodles to a client and they'd be like, I can't even tell what that is. And so it's, I don't know, we'll see with this, but it feels like a different approach, and hopefully, like I said, hopefully it's not a big waste of time, and it does end up cutting time, because Corey and I talk about that all the time on here, where it's like, the better you back plan, like the longer it takes in the initial phases, but it's like you end up high-fiving your past self. At least most of the times I've done it, I end up being like, oh, thank Josh from a year ago for planning this, as opposed to like, if I don't back plan, that's usually where it ends up being more work than necessary. So my hope is by like more back planning and intention, it'll kind of work like a storyboard or like comp, like has worked for Corey in the past, on his animations, where it's like sometimes if you just shoot from the hip, it can take like twice as long. So that's the thinking, but we'll see. And I might be back to say I hated that whole process and I need to go back to the chicken scratch very shortly. So who knows?
Yeah. There's a lot of benefit to both of those styles, I think. Ups and pluses and minuses. Yeah. How about challenges, Scott?
Challenges. Well, one challenge is, so I'm working on this digital product, and it's going to be for Procreate. And I've done one, and I don't work in Procreate a lot, so I'm trying to remember how to do like the stamps, brushes, and things like that. And I've done it before. I mean, I did a whole other product called the Hero Design Studio. And I wish I would have took better notes, because I'm trying to look back at how I did it, and I'm not exactly sure, because I've got a couple different ways saved, like to export the drawings, because I'm not doing the drawings in Procreate. I'm doing them in another program and importing them and trying to convert them to brushes that way. And I can't remember. I'm looking at the couple files that I created, and I don't remember which one was the right one and which one was the wrong one. So I guess I got to do some more research, but it's like it's one of those things where I don't use the program enough to kind of remember how to do it. So it's like I'm kind of starting over. But,
yeah, that's honestly how I feel with InDesign at my work. Like, because we do catalogs and stuff, and it's like I will become an InDesign expert for about a month and a half, and then for the rest of the year, forget everything I learned about InDesign, and then have to relearn it in like a day. I'm like, where is that again? And then you get in the flow of it, and you never have to use it again. So
yeah,
I relate.
Yeah, that's my Corey, you're muted.
I said that's why I make tutorials, is because I forget. So if ever I'm like, oh, I learned a really helpful thing, I usually will make a video tutorial just to leave myself a breadcrumb trail.
Yeah, that makes sense.
For when my memory's gone.
That's very smart, actually.
So, how about you, Josh? Challenges?
So one of them has been like, so I think I talked about this when I first got it, and now I like can definitely say if you guys want to do exercise and do exercise that's pretty effective but like low impact, I would highly recommend a water rower, because it is like the coolest thing. And it kicks my butt. It's like it's intense, and it feels like it legitimately feels like you're really rowing in like a like in a lake or something, because you feel water resistance, which is crazy and awesome, but also kicked the crap out of me like the first week or so that I transitioned to it, because it's like I'm used to this like tension band one that's like a approximation that's nothing close to it. Right. So that was like a struggle in the sense of like just trying to get used to a new workout routine. And finally I've gotten to the point where I knew about, like, initially I could make a mile, and then I was like, I can't even lift or do anything else, because it would just wear me down. Whereas now I'm at the point where I can do a mile. I can definitely feel like the heart race you feel when you do a really good like aerobic workout or whatever, and then I can switch to weights, and that's actually managed to work. So that's good. Like, that's been a struggle though, like just to get used to a new workout routine. And then the other thing is just pure exhaustion. Like the last month or so, I've just been gradually feeling more and more exhausted. And I think some of it has to do with just stuff that's going on in the world, and trying not to let that stuff impact me. But at the same time, as like a citizen of this country, it's like you kind of have to pay a little bit of attention to what's going on, and but trying not to kind of like let that consume. And then the other thing is that the main trouble is just trying to consistently do a page of these thumbnails a day. I haven't quite hit the mark. I kind of missed. I got like half done. So one of the pages took me like 2 days, and so that's kind of been a struggle. It's just like trying to keep the productivity going and finding time. So I don't know. It's kind of your typical struggles, but it's like when you like all of us juggle stuff, but it's like I commute like 2.5 hours a day to 3 hours, and so that takes away my window to kind of get much done. And so like even trying to plot like a new version of how we would proceed with like a video review or anything like that, it's like finding any time to do anything other than these comic pages is really difficult. And so I've been failing with particularly like the press release part and stuff. I know that was long-winded, but that's been my kind of big current struggle, is just trying to kind of keep above the and also just not let like imposter syndrome get to me, where it's like, because I'm not superhuman, I'll beat myself up a lot. And there's times where I just have to remind myself, like, if you have like one working hour a day, like to get what I get done is I think fairly okay. But often I'll just feel like it's not enough, and yet like there's just no time to kind of pull. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, makes total sense.
yeah. So it's kind of like, I mean, I think that's just what we all have to do to be creative. Scott, like while you're doing Young and the Dead, it's like you're still having to, work on client work and or in this case, like create more assets for Amazon that have more, viability for income. And so it's like that juggle. I mean, Scott, Corey's teaching and juggling all that madness. That's just kind of what we have to do. but it does get exhausting sometimes and a little demoralizing. But yeah, sorry, rambly.
Yeah.
What about you, Corey?
Yeah, a lot of that. Similar things. I had to kind of take a couple days off of the news because I was just doom scrolling for hours and not getting anywhere, and I don't know. And then also just kind of losing steam on some of the projects I'm working on. Just kind of feels like the other night I had planned on, because I didn't have to get up this morning. Last night I planned on working till like 4 a.m. and I sat down and I was just like, I don't want to do anything.
Right.
Yeah. And it was like I had the time. I had cleared out this block of time. I had spent all day hanging out with the family, and so like I have no guilt, and there's nothing standing in my way, and I had everything that I needed to do laid out, and it was like 12:45, and when I finally was like, all right, I'm just gonna force myself to do it. And normally once I do that, I kind of start rolling, get into a groove. And I hit 3 a.m. and I was like, I'm just gonna go to bed. So like I had another hour. I wasn't tired. It wasn't physical. It was just I put in 2 hours and 15 minutes and just figured whatever. So that's kind of uncommon for me. Usually it's the starting that's the struggle. But I'm just kind of mentally slogging through things. And then I think anytime I know something is going to end, but I am still doing it, that just becomes really taxing. so like the 48-hour art check now that we're like gonna end it and switch it up to something else in a new format and new things. It's becoming a bit of a drag as I'm like thinking about it and whatnot. So there's that. I also, as far as, I don't know if this is challenges or plans or whatever, but I have spent some time mapping out a rubric on storytelling, specifically visual storytelling, that I think would be, I think it's in embryo, but I think once it's fully formed, it'll be a good discussion point to kind of have Josh and I kind of bounce it around and tweak it and into something that I think will make sense. So, because I mean, the art check kind of started out the same way. There was a conversation or two, and then I sat down and tried to figure out like what are the like the key things, like distill it down into key components, and that's where we came up with the 3. So I think I'm getting close, but I'm doing the normal thing where I'm like super wide, and I've got to kind of like distill down into. So I'm grabbing everything, and then I'll figure out like commonalities and classifications and categories, and see if I can get it down to something that is catchy and
I like that. And my take on it, till we get there, is just like, kind of keep this casual rather than, it shouldn't be a chore. And I think like if, to me, I think I'm kind of with you on that too, where it's like you know, if it becomes like a chore or something, you know, where like work can't get done during it, like I think, you know.
Yeah. So anyway, so there's that for challenges. But yeah, I agree. I think there's, you know, I mean, we're all on the same page, but I mean, we've done 276 and a half episodes of this now. And the time has come, the walrus said. So,
Agreed.
yeah. So I don't know, but yeah. So basically that, but just like just the general brain fog of, you know, stress and craziness and whatever. Like I just feel like things that I normally am able to do effectively, efficiently, without much struggle are just significantly harder the last week or two.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So anyway, there's that, you know, getting people asking me, you know, hey, what do you think of this video, that are like close family members, and it's like you watch the video and it's like, oh, that's a straight up QAnon conspiracy theory, and so I have to like go in there and, you know, normally I just ignore stuff, but when it's like when it's your family and they have good intentions, it's like, yeah, you don't want to go down that road of like, you know, becoming radicalized. So I'm like, okay, let me talk to you about the QAnon conspiracy theory of the storm, which is the one that several people have sent me. And it's just like, it's exhausting. I think this is why I would never want to be a journalist, is because fighting for the truth as a job is so tiring.
It's tough too, because so I've known a few people who kind of fell down the wackiness. In fact, I think I was the guy, like one of the first people to tell you guys about the whole thing, because I was like, I know a couple people who believe this crazy thing, and you guys were like, what? But it's like, so I think the frustrating thing about any conspiratorial idea, and that, you know, goes even far beyond QAnon to any conspiracy, like anti-vaxxing, like there's all kinds of like kind of conspiracy theories. The difficult part is you're always on, like when you have the truth on your side, you actually are always at a disadvantage in these conversations, because you have to get into nuance, and somebody making a wild claim can kind of just make it, and then you're left to have to do the research.
You have the burden of proof.
Like why what that absurd claim is on like Bob's website with like an eagle and a flag is wrong. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it's maddening and frustrating, and I've tried to go down that hole, and like I'm almost coming to a point where I'm just like, I don't know if it's and this is my own thing, but I don't even know if it's profitable to have the discussion, and yet it's so necessary, especially when it's family or friends or somebody really close. But it's just it is maddening to like where it's like you shouldn't have to, like, the burden of proof shouldn't rest on the person who's claiming the earth is round. Like the burden of proof should rest on the person making the bold claim that like hardly any scientist on the planet would even entertain, you know? I don't know.
Right. And then yeah.
It's tough.
So I think there's a difference between people that are already bought and sold and they're into it, and to them I say, you know, cool, that's interesting, and then I move on. But people that are like, this seems weird, what do you think of this, and they're genuinely like on the precipice of being like, well, that was strange, and walking away, or I'm gonna fall down this hole, you know. I think there's a difference. so yeah, it's just weird. But I mean, you know, the challenge with conspiracy theories is you want to believe them. There's some sort of drive as human beings that we want want there to be a reason for things. And conspiracy theories give you, I mean, I am literally writing a comic book right now that is based on, if there were a giant global conspiracy, this could explain a significant amount of the hurt and horrible things in the world, and you could have something to look at and explain it. It is very difficult. This is kind of a point of existentialism. One of the things about existentialism is the absurd. It's really hard to come to grips with the fact that the universe is random. And even if you're religious, even if you believe in a higher power, whether that be God or whether that be some sort of force, or some sort of whatever, there is also, at least in my viewpoint, an element of randomness that is absurd. And you have to come to grips with the absurdity of the universe. You have to come to grips with the fact that though justice exists, there are good people that have crappy things happen to them, and that there are bad people that get away with it. And I mean, that was a big thing with, I just reread 2 stories today, and that's a big thing. I was thinking about It's a Wonderful Life. That was a big thing. They almost didn't air it because the villain of that had no negative repercussions for being a villain. Like, he stole the money and he kept the money.
And it was a really unpopular movie actually at the time it came out. Gary said he's probably one of the most anti-conspiracy theory people writing a conspiracy theory comic. Yeah, I think like I think you're right in the sense it's appealing because it gives us a sense of control or purpose. And I think like a lot of people are really uncomfortable with the idea of like driving on a freeway. I mean, this is at its smallest amount, like, like I'd say if you break it down to just like the simplest version of a conspiracy that we all like to believe, it's like if you're driving on a freeway and you get cut off, it's a lot easier to accept this crazy conspiracy that this driver intended to cut you off. They did that on purpose, right? There's a purpose to what they did because it risked your life. So like, your fear centers in your brain just like are sparking. And when that happens, like one thing that relieves that, it's an easier go-to is anger and assumption of intention, right? So it's like, it's way easier to assign an intention rather than just kind of accept like, hey, that person's probably running late for work. They aren't even thinking about your car. Like they probably didn't even see you. Like you're not the center of that freeway. Right. And but so many people suffer from road rage in our society because it's a lot easier in the moment to just kind of accept or believe this weird conspiracy that you're the center of the freeway and that everyone's revolving around your car rather than you're all a bunch of cars randomly on a road that like end up screwing with each other without meaning to. Like there's no intent. Sometimes there is intent, but my point is like the assumption of intent is just so appealing for us to just jump to. And I think, like the idea that like all things that happen in government that are bad or like by some evil cabal is like a lot easier to accept than like just thinking about your own workplace and the morons you work with, like everyone has a workplace where they've worked with like one person who you're like, how did you get this job? Like everyone's had that, like anywhere you work. And you're like, you see how errors happen in your own workplace where you're like, oh, okay, like that person dropped the ball because they aren't good at their job, or like that person dropped the ball because it got chaotic and these things happen. From an outer perspective, if they're looking at your work, they might be like, that was a conspiracy. Like that was a broad sweeping conspiracy with intention to do this horrible thing. And it's like a lot of the time it's just human beings having errors. And that's frightening, right? To think that there's these vulnerable human beings, right, running the government and with fingers on nuclear triggers. Like that is frightening. So it's probably a little more comforting to be like, it's this one thing is the like a broad reaching conspiracy. And aside from that, it also gives people a sense that it can be defeated or solved, right? Where it's like, if you have a villain, like one of the reasons we like villains in films, it's like, you can just defeat that villain and it's all done. But I mean, this world is not a world where, like a good example that's current is like Trumpism, when Trump is gone, is not going to just disappear, right? But it would be comforting to be like, well, that guy's going to be gone, so like the whole thing will be solved. No, it's there's complexity to it, and there's a web of it. So
yeah, and I think another thing is with absurdity, is purpose is really important, because without that, it's really hard to get through your day.
Yeah.
Like I just think of, let's say that I've spent the last 40 years, right? I started as a child, spent the last 35 to 40 years honing a particular skill. I get really, really good at it, right? And I mean, hundreds of thousands of hours of work put into this skill, and it hasn't paid off yet. And then tomorrow I step on the ice wrong and I fall and I break my neck and I'm dead. Like, that is so absurd that it would be really difficult to come to grips with the reality of the situation, which is like, sometimes stuff just happens.
Yeah.
And there's no meaning to it. It's a meaningless death, or people being killed because somebody is like reading a text message that they got on their phone. Like, there's no deeper meaning to that. It is a pointless death. But then the other thing, Gary says, as a government employee, I can assure you the government isn't successfully pulling off massive complex generation.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's weird, is like, I think that it's weird to me that so many people buy into that kind of conspiracy. Not that there aren't conspiracies, right? Like,
well, and that's what I was about to say, is that the tempting thing about conspiracies is I do think that there is collusion and force and evil in the world, right? And I do think that there are backroom deals and there are things that happen, right?
Yeah.
I just don't think that I think you can't really get more than like 4 or 5 people in sync enough to like work efficiently. I mean, if you look at like, I've been thinking about this a lot as I've been thinking about like social media. The major problem with social media, and I just did a big long Twitter rant on this that might turn into a video essay because I'm trying to get to it, but like, people can't agree on pizza. Like, people can't agree on like simple things, and so
theorists can agree on pizza.
but in addition to that, if you think about like the reality of the situation is that there are complexities and nuance.
Yeah.
And most people are not thinking about the effects of their actions. Like, they're hoping for the effects of their actions, but like, I think that there are a lot of evil people in tech, but I also think that there's a lot of good people and a lot of neutral people. And I don't actually think, as much as I have a problem with the algorithms and I have a problem with the destruction of our societies based on what's going on, and how we're like literally actively inventing our own doomsday devices right now and accepting it and paying money for them to come into our home. I don't actually think that there's a giant conspiracy amongst Silicon Valley to like go in and like do this. I just think it's the profit motive that they've fallen into. It makes the most sense, and they would have to go against their own financial interests to do the correct thing. And so they're just doing the easy thing, which is actually the destruction of humanity as we know it. But like, that's easier than, like, destruction is always easier than creation.
Yeah. And also, the idea of like chalking it all as like the social media companies would be forgetting the consumers who are driving it to its own death. Like, it's like we're actually feeding a machine that's killing us the stuff that's killing us,
Right.
like and begging for more of it because of the way we're wired as human beings. It's a really weird thing, but like that's the part that always baffles me, is not that there aren't bad actors. There are always bad actors, right? And a lot of the worst actors like think they're doing good, which is even more frightening. And then some are just straight up bad actors. But yeah, I mean, just this idea that any business or group or collective of people work where like one person pulls a lever and everything gets done streamlined and efficiently and pre-planned is like it for one thing like signifies to me somebody having a real lack of business experience, because like business is not like that. Like marketing is not like that. You can have all the stats in the world, you can have the best product ever, and you can still misstep because of the unpredictability of people. Like that's the thing that's really like missing from a lot of conspiracy theories, where they're just way too clean cut. And even if you look at like stuff like MK Ultra, right, which actually happened, which is always mixed in with conspiracy theories, the papers that got declassified for MK Ultra are like weird and chaotic and nuts. It's not like they have this like efficient plan where they're like, and then we will learn how to program brains. It's like, it's more like some guys in a boardroom were like, hey, LSD does some weird stuff to people. Let's just do some weird stuff and see what happens. Like, and then maybe we could use it in war, or maybe we could use it for this, or maybe we could use it to like grow plants. Like it wasn't concocted. And the other thing that's interesting from what's come out about that is it's not like this nefarious plot where like one guy was the head of it. It was like a bunch of stupid people in a bunch of scattered departments doing chaos. Like, and so like, I think the part that ties so heavily into existentialism with it is more of a realism of like looking at people like the end of the world. Like one of the reasons Cormac McCarthy's The Road is so haunting and disturbing is it's much more realistic about people than a lot of like sort of end of the world type books, where it's like, and like in reality, when there's a seditious act, like a lot of people were shocked that the Capitol thing was violent, and yet people were taking selfies. It's like, that actually makes perfect sense. Like this, we're in a world where people think they're joking when they're not joking. When they're doing serious actions, they might just be like, haha, like I'm just kidding. Like it's not clear cut like evil. Like evil is never like that, and villains are never like that. So I think I do think it's really important for people to have like this kind of crazy not so crazy like existentialist look at things, just to have like a kick of reality, because it's like sometimes things are unplanned. Sometimes things just chalk up to like somebody dropping the ball and messing up, because we're human and we mess up. And sometimes if you're in like a company where like lives are at the end of that, like lives get lost by human error, and sometimes it's just human error. And like I rarely meet a doctor who like thinks that like everything's pre-planned, because like you could be the best surgeon in the world and you're still going to lose people. Like that's the world we live in, where you can do everything right and it can just not work. Right. And to me, like people who believe in like wild conspiracies, I feel like they've stepped away from like the reality that we see around us, you know, in order to kind of be comforted by, you know, I guess like an idea of like Santa Claus or something, where it's like, you know, you get coal if you're bad and you get presents if you're good. It's like, that's a nice theory, but we're in a world where people get presents when they're bad. Right? Like we're not in a world where like you look around and it seems like that's the reality that matches us. So I do agree, but it's hard to, if somebody's taken what they view as like the red pill or whatever, and they're kind of like, they've gone down the chute and they're in this world where like facts are just completely, you know, up to your own choosing. It's hard to know what to do, you know.
It's going to be funny immediately after this conversation having like the CIA declassify that they've known who the programmer of the simulation is that we're running, and that actually there's like some just like wiggle expression on a couple variables of our lives. It's all mathematical and it all makes sense. We just can't see it because of our limited viewpoint. But yeah, so I can't even remember why we got that. Jim just said, I just joined. Can you recap the entire show point by point? Yeah, the entire show so far has been, I don't know how we got here. Somehow we started talking about, oh, I know why. Yeah. I had to debunk a QAnon theory. And it was exhausting. That's how we got to this point. And then we started talking about why they're so attractive. But so yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It makes for really good storytelling. Like it's kind of like I can't remember who said this, but somebody was talking about writers, and you can't have a meaningless death in literature. Like you just can't. Like even if the intent is for somebody to die and it be meaningless, the meaning of that you're trying to convey to the audience, the reader, the viewer, is that in real life there are meaningless deaths. And so the fact that you have chosen to make that part of your story gives it meaning. It's like paradoxical, but like nothing, there can't be a meaningless death in in literature. But in life, the interesting thing about it is, now that I'm talking about death, there can be meaningless deaths that don't mean anything, that are random and they suck and they're horrible. And yet, because we are creatures of learning and meaning and purpose, we can take those random things and actually assign meaning to it. And there are meaning, there is some meaning to some things. But yeah, not everything means something, but then you can actually learn from randomness and grow and come out of that better or worse.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I'm disproving my own theory. I mainly think that there isn't a prefabricated track, some master puppeteer that causes all of these things to happen. And especially, I don't think that is some sort of organization, or deep state or Illuminati or.
Yeah. I also find it really weird that recently, like, I've had to have this discussion with a couple of people who are like, literally, like, I will mention the guy who was in the Capitol storming that was wearing a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt, right? I mean, that's clear white supremacist. Like, there's no if, and, or but about like what that shirt is about. And a lot of these people had like paraphernalia that's like straight up white supremacy, no like hyperbole about it. This isn't like, oh, I'm going to call somebody I politically disagree with like that word. It's like, no, they are actual white supremacists. And I've had this discussion where I have friends who politically are on the other side of the aisle than I am, who are in denial about that even being a factor in what happened at the Capitol. Like, and basically their kind of explanation is like, well, you see, Nazis would say they're Nazis, or like white supremacists would say they're white supremacists. And it's like, do bad guys in convincing films say like, I'm a bad guy? Like is that how it works? Like when somebody goes into a bank to rob it, do they usually go in and say, I'm a bank robber, look out? Like, people don't, like, we're not in a cartoon world where people just identify themselves by yelling out who they are. Like usually their attire can be a dead giveaway. Like if you like, so I don't know. That's been baffling to me too, where it's like, I don't understand like what reality some people are living in, where it's like, you literally can't, you can't call an insurrection an insurrection because somebody committing the insurrection like didn't think it was an insurrection. It's just a weird world we live in. I don't know. And I'm trying not to get too political, but at the same time, it's just been a baffling but you're right. From a storytelling perspective, it's been fascinating because I think like maybe these are people who just should be writing books. Like, I think maybe that's the appeal of something like QAnon, right? Where it's like you can do all this research and invent stories and like feel like you have significance because you're, you know, getting keyed into something the rest of the world isn't in on. I feel like maybe some of that energy could be better put to like maybe these people just need to be writing books and like making stuff as you know, like I don't know. Anyhow,
Now I'm wondering how many QAnon people are just fanfic of the world.
yeah, I mean, I do think there's a bit of that. You know, I definitely know some of the more extreme political people I live near tend to like cosplay like on a daily basis. Like they'll cosplay as their favorite sports player. They'll cosplay, you know, with their car. They cosplay with like, you know, American flags everywhere. It's like, you know, like as if by wearing that, like suddenly you're more patriotic than the other person. Like there's a lot of that going on. So I could see that, like some cosplaying going on where it's like, I'm going to cosplay this character. I don't know. It's really fascinating, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. So, yeah, this is more of what I want the art check to be, is just conversations about stuff rather than, I don't know. So
I'm thinking this a lot more, honestly, just chatting, but you know.
Yeah. So should we, I don't know. Do you want to keep for the next little while until we figure out what we're doing with the show? Do you want to just loosely continue to art check, or do you just want to get together Mondays and see what happens? Or because I mean this whole conversation happened because not because we chose the topic, but because we
just shot the shit. I think we should just, I mean, my thought is like, let's just shoot the shit and work on art, you know, like, and then also, you know, we can keep ourselves accountable to like, you know, making progress and stuff. But I don't know. What's your thought, Scott? You down? I don't know.
Yeah.
So Scott, have you met? I know you're not as like politically charged, but it's like, have you met? Have you like run across any kind of crazy conspiracy theory stuff in your neighborhood? Like,
I don't get out much. No.
Yeah.
I mean, not really. I mean, I mean, I don't know. The people that I mean, I'm friends with people that you know. I don't really talk politics, but I definitely lean left, and I have, you know, I have friends that are right, and we just don't talk politics, you know, I guess.
Yeah.
Scott has to dance around all of this because what we're really going to find out is, you know, 50 years from now, is that the secret underground layer of CircWorks is actually the hub of everything that we're assuming isn't controlled. It's actively seeking the destruction of humanity by
around
aliens and threats.
There's no flat books. They're all round.
I do hope, like my friends and stuff that I know that do lean right don't support what happened in the Capitol, because that's pretty nuts.
Well, and I also think along those lines of politics and everything else and whatever, like as soon as I'll say this in a different way. As soon as I am certain that I am not wrong, I'm in a dangerous spot.
Yeah.
Like as soon as I'm like, no, I can't be wrong, you know, blah, 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 blah. And that's where I think people of all political ilks, you know, all of the people out there that are in one category or the other of whatever, as soon as you have determined, and that's as an intellectual, not that I like to call myself that, but as somebody who, you know, like does a lot of meta thinking, like thinking about thinking and like how thinking works and how we process stuff and like trying to understand, input and interpretation of stimulus. As soon as I assume that gives me some sort of moral high ground or some sort of whatever, like I'm in trouble. And that's why it's really taxing for me to like confront lies that people like honestly believe is because it's like in good faith, I have to question myself in that process of questioning that, even, well, you say of course, but there are a lot of people out there. Most people, I think, don't actively question their bias.
Yeah,
that takes work.
Yeah, and like here's the weird thing is like, I'm a very like pro, like I wouldn't say I'm a socialist. I think if I talked to somebody who was extremely far on the right, they would call me a socialist. but I'm extremely far left, and I believe in the idea of like strong social systems. But I don't think I do like capitalism. I just think capitalism doesn't cover everything. But as somebody on that side, like I do find it invigorating and interesting. So I subscribe to some really, really far right podcasts, partially to and like news sites and stuff, because I like to know. I like to know what other people are thinking, and I also like to know what's going on. So like for me, even seeing what happened at the Capitol wasn't like a big shock because I actually pay attention to the far right. And so it pretty much just seemed like, yeah, this is kind of where this was leading. But I do think that's really valuable. And I think it's important for people, regardless of like your political viewpoints and stuff, to kind of like check out. I do love that. I like Gary's quote there, but I do think it's important, and the onus, especially as creatives, on us is to kind of get outside of our own little bubble in the sense of what we think, because if anything, even if it doesn't change your viewpoint, it will at least solidify what you believe. But like I said, it can be really frustrating because if you're a person who likes to read and research and actually check things out, and then somebody kind of forces you into a position where you have to debunk like a conspiracy theory with no support whatsoever, that's on an obscure website that's like a GeoCities site, and kind of the proof of that is like, well, you can Google it and it shows up like that. That is a frustrating position for, I think, I don't like the term intellectual either, but I mean, I think just as somebody who likes to read and research and actually, follow history and stuff, that can be a very frustrating position because it's not like everything's equivalent in life, where all ideas are equal. That would be a great world, but like I said, if somebody's making kind of an absurd claim, the burden of proof should fall on that person making the absurd claim, not the other way around. But it's hard to meet people who, it's hard to meet people on the right who will take a figure like AOC and like actually have like followed their career so like they'll talk about like this person's extreme and you're like, how, like what's a specific point? And usually they'll bring up bullet points that are not even factual, or misquotes, like quotes that aren't actually something they said. And I totally see that on the left as well, where they'll do that, like demonize a person on the right. I especially remember that happening a lot with Ron Paul, where
people on the left quoting the SNL version of Sarah Palin, thinking it was real.
Yes, I mean, and the frustrating part is, I mean, there were enough real quotes to pull
right.
from.
And that's the same. That's the same with AOC. Like AOC and Palin have said a lot of weird stuff, but like cartoon caricatures of them are cartoon caricatures of them. But sometimes people are so wacky that it's hard to differentiate parody from reality. Anyway, but yeah, all of that is interesting. But yeah, I don't know. So that's also, I don't know why I feel the need to do this, because no one's going to listen to me since we're still on challenges technically. I have been trying to come up with what I think my answer is to the current social media free speech, censorship, regulation, free market problem. And just to frame that slightly, I'm in the middle. I don't think I'm super right or super left, but I go super right and super left on different topics. But generally speaking, I like letting businesses do what they do, unless there's these externalities, there's unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a private company who just deplatformed Trump. And I think people on both sides of that argument have really good points, and I think they're all correct. And the problem is that it's hard because they think they're at odds with each other, but they're actually, it's kind of like if you just took the camera and zoomed out a little bit, they're not fighting the same battle. And the answer is not something that will fit on a bumper sticker or in a tweet. And I've been trying to find that answer, and I think it's a combination of a number of things. But that's been really mentally taxing lately. And I think it's like, I think we need privatized social media, but I also think we need public social media, like BBC, NPR version of YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. And then I also think we need guiding principles that were written in this century by people who understand what is happening, rather than old white men that, and I'm not disparaging all old white men, but a lot of the people that interviewed Zuckerberg the first time around didn't know how the internet worked. And now, I mean, if you watch the antitrust hearings, they've got people on both sides of the aisle that are on top of it, and they're asking the right types of questions and things like that. But like, the basic idea is like, if you take, and this was my Twitter thread that kind of got me on this, because I was trying, I process publicly, so I was trying to figure this out. If a group of 5-year-olds comes up with a game, they invent a game that has never been invented before, which I think happens hundreds of times a day with groups of 5 to 11-year-olds. They just come up with games. But that game caught on so much so, and so quickly, that within 5 years, it had become the source of communication globally, so that every human being on the planet was affected by this game that these 5-year-olds made up because they were having fun. That is social media right now. It's not like anyone ever intended it to become the platform of public speech, but it has. And it's theirs. They made it up, so they should be able to set the rules. But it also has a positive or negative impact on everyone on the entire planet. And so they shouldn't be able to set the rules unilaterally without any guidelines. And so that if we were to say, hey, all of these airplanes in the sky that just got invented, and like we're able to have like transoceanic like flights now and everything, this rule that we used to have with the horse and buggy, let's just like apply all of the rules that we have with like horse and buggy carriages to like airplanes. That doesn't work, because airplanes were an unprecedented event. They changed the rules so much that there needed to be new rules. There needed to be an FAA situation so that you could deal with that. And yeah,
Corey, sorry, I want to chime in because you're on a really important point about kind of one of the most frustrating things to me about this is extreme left that I've seen commenting on this has suddenly become like hardcore free market capitalists. And the hardcore free market capitalists, when it comes to this, suddenly are all pro regulation. And that to me frustrates the hell out of me, because I think it points out a hypocrisy of both extremes, where it's like, in reality, none of us really, in my opinion, none of us really believe in a completely deregulated market. And the airplane example you brought up is a really good point, because it's like, we all kind of believe, I think, that there should be some reasonable restrictions placed on where airplanes can fly. Otherwise, we'd have airplanes exploding and like landing in different cities and like just complete chaos in the air, without like a common agreed upon like guideline. And so I definitely think you're right in the sense of I think you're on the right path, at least from what it sounds like, because I do think what it comes down to is like, unfortunately for people who are like really big fans of the free market, if you guys want a change in the way that social media is run, you're going to have to actually get an anti-monopoly law, an antitrust law. And I think that's really going to be essential.
But antitrust and anti-monopoly is only part of the problem, because
that's one half. I mean, that's one chunk. But my point is that's a part of it. The other part, the other portion is definitely there's going to have to be some kind of regulation on it, like much like there is on a lot of things. But a lot of what people are pushing for with like the liability is not going to be an effective solution, because if you make me liable for whatever anybody says in my household, suddenly you're talking 1984, like in the sense of like, there's going to be a lot of newspeak going on, because no one's going to feel comfortable speaking their mind. And if they do, I'm going to kick them out, right? Because I could get arrested for what anyone says. And that's a dangerous precedent. So I think what you're angling towards, and I want you to get back to like the airplane part, but I think what you're angling towards sounds like a more reasonable path than what I've heard from kind of either.
Yeah. So, I mean, my basic point is just the idea of the unprecedented, right? And so I just am copying and pasting stuff from a tweet here, but we're applying rules that were written, laws that were written during the time of movable type, when literally a typesetter would go in and they would take a piece of metal that had an A on it and they would set that down, right? And leading wasn't a feature of the computer. It was like actually lines of lead that would add space in between. Like, those are the rules that are governing a system where right now, my kids can't even fathom the concept of that. Like, they don't even know what like my childhood technology was like, is beyond them. My 2-year-old, when he's in the store and hears an announcement come over the PA system, he looks up at the ceiling and says, "Alexa, stop," because he thinks it's the voice in our home that delivers information, answers questions, and tells us what time of day it is, and then plays music.
Yeah, like, and most kids that age too, when they get to a screen, it's like they don't even understand the concept of the screen not responding to them touching it. Like they just assume, like, my son will still have these moments where it's like he'll forget our TV is not like a touch screen, and he'll just be like, I want to click that menu, and it's like, right. You actually have to use a remote. Like, it's baffling, much less like try to explain like a rotary phone to these,
I mean, it's exactly that. And it's the idea that we have technology nowadays that is so intuitive that it seems second nature, and yet it's slightly nefarious because there's a profit motive behind the communication, which has always been my problem with journalism, which has always been my problem with television and radio. But I mean, we decided when TV and radio came out, we decided as a society that, that could go really wrong. And so we came up with the FTC and the FCC. Like, we were like, hey, instead of just letting anyone put any images and any sounds they want out there into the space to be consumed publicly, maybe we should have like some rules, some guiding principles for the betterment of the public health. Because right now, the internet is basically a place that is run by very few people that are, I mean, the gatekeepers were dead for a little, and they've been reanimated as these hipster programmers that are, you know, in Northern California. And they are not thinking of the global welfare. Like, they're not thinking of the human welfare. They're thinking too short-sighted because it's in their best interest to be manipulative and to let things go. It's literally in the best interest of the people that are controlling public communication right now to have horrible conspiracy theories, to make people angry at each other, to break up marriages, to cause addiction. Like, it's in their best interest to do that. And that's fine, but it's not fine in a completely unregulated situation where we just do that. And the two things that have happened that have caused this situation is, early on, the courts decided to let companies act like people. And so they allowed technology, they allowed technology to behave as if they, how do you say that? Well, as a photographer with a camera, I could walk around and take pictures of anything publicly, right? I have that right as a single individual to do that. Google argued that they had the right to photograph the entire world and map it and put it out on the internet because a single individual has that right. And so we personified companies in a way that gave them rights that should not exist in a corporate nature, because it's too big, because people are not wired, our brains are not made in a way that should be connecting to billions of people. We're made in a way where we should be connecting to tens of people.
So the thing that's baffling, right, is like, we're talking about a lot of problems, and I agree with you. And like, that surveillance capitalism book that you recommended, like, really opened my eyes to like some of the real problems. Plus, like, I know people who work at Facebook and stuff, and it's like, not like, even the people, I think even the higher ups are not happy with it. And the weird thing is, like, this is something I think a lot of people need to realize, like, you know, like, people on the right who are all pissed off about, like, quote unquote woke culture online, or like comics that are going, like, you know, there's all these people in, you know, in Comics Gate and stuff who like get really pissed about, like, oh, they made Wonder Woman a man, or like whatever. I don't know what it is that they're mad about, but they're mad about like whatever it is in the comics industry, not realizing every decision that most companies make, like, if they're a good company and they're around and they're not bankrupt, is for the profit motive. So you have to understand, like, if you're driving at the profit motive, my point is like people a lot of, at least for me, a lot of people who criticize like the modern comics industry always bring up like Squirrel Girl and the floppy sales of Squirrel Girl. They're like, this just doesn't sell, but they're just pushing it because of their liberal agenda. But the weird thing is, if you look on graphic novel sales, like, Squirrel Girl is like one of the best selling graphic novels of all time. Like, there's a reason they're publishing it. It's because people are buying it. And the second people stop buying it, they'll flip from being woke to being like the most right-wing like conspiracy nuts in the world, if that's what's selling. The reason they banned Trump wasn't because of some moral imperative. The reason they banned Trump was because, like, it's bad for business to potentially be associating with ending democracy in the United States. I'm just saying, like, nobody's going to want to do business with that. Like, that's and also it's really bad for your business if democracy gets dismantled and you happen to be in America. Like, so like, people will bring up, like, why didn't they ban the Ayatollah and they banned this guy? Because this is in their hometown. And like, the point being, like, if you want more free speech, like, in the sense of like a balance between the left and the right. You have to acknowledge that there are certain situations like the poisoning the well scenario that Corey and I have brought up a million times, where it's like you can be a business and be driven by the profit motive, and that's great, and capitalism is great. But there's a point where profit for a single company and damage done to society kind of start conflicting, right? So if you want more free speech and more balance, like on a public forum, that's a private company, right? Like you need to start thinking about regulations. You know, like you actually have to start thinking about regulations when you're talking about damage to the public good that goes against the profit motive. Like what Corey was talking about with the addictive nature of these things. Like there are regulations that were put on gambling, right? And I think Corey would probably agree with this, but like we might want to consider that for like iPhones, right? Because like a lot of modern apps are developed with the same, like they're playing at the same exact like exploitations that gambling does to most people. And if you deregulate, like you're going to create like a culture of addiction. It's a weird thing where it's like we actually might need to like kind of think about regulations. But I think it's way more nuanced than just saying like we need the companies to be able to be sued for what you say, because the second you create that scenario, you've like shut down all social media is just gone at that point. Yeah. So like I don't know, Corey, like what do you think? I mean, I know I'm rambling and you may not have agreed with all of that, but the point being like, where do you think the solution lies? Because personally, I don't think it lies with that. I forget the number that a lot of people are pushing to get through, where it holds the companies liable for what people say. I don't think people have thought that out, because it's like the second that happens, you wouldn't even have a Donald Trump Twitter account. Like the first thing he'd say on social media would be so incendiary, because even people who love Trump, like they know. Like I've never met even the most avid Trump supporter who wouldn't acknowledge that like he says stuff that's like way out of bounds, like all the time. That's
yeah. People. I believe it's 230.
Yeah,
that's protected, but basically it classified social media as something other than a publisher, because publishers are liable for what they publish.
Yeah, and I think you'd have to create a crushing situation for free speech by
it would end it.
Yeah, so
there's no other track that would take other than massive gatekeeping of a chosen few allowed to speak publicly, and no one else would be allowed to speak publicly. Yeah, it would end it completely.
Yeah, and I think if people feel like the whole social media landscape is owned by liberals, then what do you think that's going to turn out like? That's not going to be like a free speech, very right-leaning scenario. Like that's it, especially if people believe that that's like the bias of the people running these things. Like that's the wrong solution. So like, what do you think the right solution is? That to me is baffling, because I definitely, Gary pointed this out in the chats, but it's like, I don't think this is going to be like a clear cut black and white, like you do this one thing and it solves the whole problem kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. And that's the challenge, is I haven't come up with the exact solution yet, but I think two things are a good start. And one is, new regulation on internet speech that balances the freedom of the people with the people's general welfare. I think people should have the ability to get on the internet and say things.
Yeah.
If you stop that, then you're going to kill one of the best things that's come out of the last 100 years, as far as overthrowing oppressive governments in Egypt. And I mean, it's, like to starting a business and not having to pay thousands of dollars a month for a billboard. You know what I mean? There's that. But then the other side is, I'm not allowed to run into a crowded theater and yell fire because of the violence that would ensue as people get trampled to death as they try to get out of there, if it's not true, right? That would be a lie, and I would be held liable for that. And so there's got to be some sort of balance. I think there needs some kind of regulation and agency that understands that and it is very hands-off, but has the ability to step in, which is terrifying, because I don't trust the government any more than I trust anybody else. But to have that type of ability is not great, but I think kind of needed. And so there'd have to be checks and balances on that regulation as well. I think there'd have to be watchdogs for the watchdogs. And then the other one is a government-funded public access social network that isn't profit-driven. It's not driven by collecting our data or manipulating us or selling predictive behaviors of groups of people. There's no segmented audiences or anything. Some sort of version of PBS, BBC situation. And then there also needs to be some accountability for this that doesn't destroy 230. It doesn't turn it. See, getting rid of 230 makes social media companies publishers, and that is the problem. Is you're applying old rules to an unprecedented new thing, right? And so that's like saying, hey, remember the typesetters of the past? We had these rules. We're going to apply those rules. It doesn't work. There needs to be new rules.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that, to say like, well, they can just do whatever they want. They're a private company. No, there are externalities in place. There's nuance to this situation. We already have this. We already have limits on these things. We have decided as a society that we're not okay with certain things. Like you can't take pornographic pictures of minors and distribute those on the internet. We're not okay with what that does to a society, to that individual, what that causes. And so there are certain limits.
Yeah.
The difficulty of it is exactly what Gary is talking about, the volume of what's happening. But, the other thing is, I think, and this is a big challenge and would need to be a global initiative, is we need to take a serious look at what we're doing with artificial intelligence and curb that.
Yeah.
Because I just saw a headline the other day in a publication that I respect that said, that America needs to up its game to compete with China's AI. And that's an arms race that fleshy human beings are going to lose.
Yeah. And it's I also think like another prong to this, especially when it comes to like the spread of conspiracy, that's just like, it's kind of a unique situation because I think like in the past, you'd have like your random guy who kind of had like a tinfoil hat. And like, I actually remember in junior college, there was a guy on campus who wore like a tinfoil pyramid on his head. And we used to, it's funny because I have a good friend who grew up in the same area, went to the same junior college, and posted a tweet about it like a month ago. It was like, remember the weird tinfoil hat guy, like the literal tinfoil hat guy from campus? And I was like, oh man, I can't believe you remember that too. That used to be the realm of conspiracy. And then like, people kind of having fun. Like it used to be a little more harmless. And I think one of the issues about the scenario we're in now, where you can have conspiratorial, like, you can have like minority viewpoints, like a conspiracy, like of the flat earth, where it would be your, like odd guy in the town who believes that, who can now access like 1,000 other strange people in the town and then proliferate those ideas online and build communities around them. And then actually give it more legs. So I think part of that problem, from what I see with like the internet impacting that as well, is the fact that like we've had like the death of local journalism, where it's like you don't have like a strong fact checker in most communities anymore. Like most small newspapers are like that are still around are now really beholden to whoever's covering the bills. And so you have these profit-driven local newspapers that are willing to kind of print whatever swill is going to sell, or whatever the wealthy owner of that newspaper wants pushed, right? Whatever propaganda. And so I think like what you're talking about with like a PBS style funding needs to happen at a local journalism level too, where we need to come up with a system that's going to fund real journalism, like legitimate journalists who have to find evidence and spend long amounts of time researching topics. And unfortunately, that's like way less profitable than just generating clickbait that's going to cause hate and division that gets spread across social media landscapes. So finding a system for that would be, I think, really important for it too. But it's such a complicated web of a problem, and I do think, like, as artists, it's tough because it's like we kind of have to engage in social media because that's kind of where the readers are at. That's where like the buyers are at, and yet it's frustrating because I think for sanity's sake, it would be nice to be able to just kind of take a long vacation from social media.
Yeah. And
even...
I like it. I mean, I get a lot out of social media. I'm in a fairly isolated area, and it's good. But anyway, I don't know. We're almost up to 2 hours.
Oh,
I just want to point out I'm doing a really poor job of 2021 being a much lighthearted creation for me. So, yeah.
To be fair, 2021 is not doing a very good job at making that an easy prospect.
So I saw on Twitter somebody said 2021 is actually 2020 and 2016 standing on top of each other wearing a trench coat in disguise. But yeah, I hope it'll look up that the vaccine wasn't the silver bullet that everybody hoped it was as far as like ending everything immediately and everything going back to normal, right? I think it's good, and I've looked into the science of it, and it makes sense on how it's going to work, but it's a slow rollout, and then politics being what they are, and then the world being what it is, and and I think we are going to look at this era much like we do Vietnam or World War II, where there are going to be generations to come that have like a global shared PTSD event of all of this.
Yeah,
it's weird to see it. It's weird to see it in slow motion and live it hour by hour and day by day. But like, I think 10 years from now, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, hey, remember when the entire planet shut down and everything sucked and everyone hated everybody and everybody was getting sick and millions of people were dying and politics was a nightmare globally and there was a worldwide economic crash? I mean, there's no way that isn't going to affect everyone the rest of their lives. I mean, whether we're going to be conscious of it or not, it's been a trajectory altering experience for the human species.
Yeah, definitely for me. And one of the reasons I feel a little more comfortable kind of being a little more open about politics in this day and age is I've realized more and more like the idea to say like I'm not political is a very like privileged position. And I'm not talking about like some woke idea. I'm just saying like, a good example is like locally in the Antelope Valley, there's a proliferation of people who are anti-vaxxers, and we're in California, and California, like our local ICU, and keep in mind, like up until the election, a common thing I would hear my neighbors say was like, well, this won't be so bad after November, right? Like, because they had bought into this idea that this whole thing's a conspiracy, and that like the whole thing was just done for a re-election campaign. And now we're close to 400,000 dead in the US. And there's still people who are kind of proliferating these ideas and sort of talking about like, well, we should just herd immunity it. And so it's going to cost like lives. And it's like, I have family members who like literally aren't going to do vaccines if they get them as an option, and they might die of COVID, and the people around them might be at risk of COVID because of that. And like, so it's one of those things where like to just kind of try to be like middle of the road and be like, well, you know, your ideas, my ideas, like when it actually costs lives and causes like mass pandemics to spread or causes like an actual insurrection at like the Capitol building of a country I really believe in. It's like there's moments like that where it's hard to, like for me personally, I just can't feel comfortable like staying muted about it or pretending that like politics has no effect on my life, because it does. And I have a kid growing up in this country. Like I can't afford to not speak about it, even on whatever, you know, platform. But that being said, I don't like hate or dislike people who disagree with me. I just, you know, I do think there's a time and place to kind of speak out about things. Like for instance, like, you know, and what's been interesting is like even on social media, all the people who I knew who were like talking about after November, like this whole thing will disappear. I haven't seen them say a word about it. And it's shocking because it's like you've literally, I mean, right now we have the fruit of that. And like, had I been proliferating that idea, I probably would have spoken up about like, hey, you know what, I was wrong. I think that's important. I think that's important for us to like, as nerdy as it is, because we're creatives and we want to create, and like in order to create you actually need a world to create in. So I think
Yeah,
that's my little 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I've still got problems with being personally with being political publicly.
Yeah.
Because I think Scott's so tired, and he's like, "Oh, Corey's starting again."
I am like super tired, and I gotta wake up. If you guys don't mind, I mean, you guys can keep going, but I gotta go. So I gotta take my daughter to school in the morning and stuff too.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We should just wrap. But
Yeah,
I was just gonna say this one last thing is, I think for me personally, talking about politics gets in the way about talking about guiding principles, and that's where I like to stick. Is most people think I am fairly political online, but I actually have been wrong so many times in my life that I don't like making definitive political statements, but I'm fairly consistent in the principles that I believe in and live.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that's like I said, some people would find that inherently political in the fact that you're talking about your principles, and I think it's one of those things of like, I think regardless, you're being political like in this world. So like
yeah, you and I have this disagreement on what the definition of politics is, but so that we all can go to bed and close this out. Go buy some t-shirts from Scott.
Yes.
Is there a link that people can go to, Scott?
Yeah, it's in the thing here. It's was it Amazon/shop/ right there. Amazon/shop/Circworks.
Okay.
And Young and the Dead, there's a few different styles, different colors. And like I said, the Young and the Dead in particular are like pretty much priced at just cost, just so I can sell and move up to the next tier. But there's other, there's like the Circworks logo and some other shirts and stuff up there too.
So go buy some of that, because that's super helpful. Go buy Josh's book, and you can find that at quarterlystories.com, joshforkemble.com. Buy it, review it. I read it again today and reviewed it. And you can go buy my stuff or not buy my stuff. I don't have a lot for sale right now, but you can look at my stuff at coreykerr.com. If you want to look at the comic I was talking about earlier, it's up there in the blog. So you can read that for free. And this show will stick around in some form or another, but be totally different soon. So I like the chat. I wish I could have engaged more with it, but there's a lot of Corey and Gary are saying some awesome stuff in there.
Oh, yeah. Also, while you guys are at it, since Gary Hodges is in our chat, like definitely buy Dinosaurs versus Mars Bots. We all dig it. So
yeah,
that's another.
That's good stuff. All right, we'll catch you guys all later. Go make stuff.